If you've spent any time at all over the past decade lurking on any of the major online video game forums, you're likely to have encountered some discussion on the following game: Dark Souls. And if you have, it's also very likely that you've encountered a little bit of this: arguing. This comes down to rankings, bosses, builds, difficulty, fairness, world design, pretty much anything that can be debated has been. But through this process of debate, I believe there has been a bit of an oversimplification of one issue that has kind of been elevated over time to meme status. And it's regarding the second half of Dark Souls. Oftentimes it's said somewhat like this: I loved Dark Souls 1, but the second half was terrible. The game really falls off after Anor Londo. Izalith, bad. Bed of Chaos, bad. Second half, bad. It's such a common criticism at this point that you would be hard-pressed to find any thread anywhere about Dark Souls where this topic did not inevitably come up. And that really brings me to the point of this video. I believe that the complaints about the second half of Dark Souls are overblown. And part of that has to do with the fact that second half can mean 100 different things to 100 different people. Now, there is something a little deeper going on here, and I do think there is a good reason things feel a little different after completing Anor Londo, but I'll touch on that in a little bit. What people are generally referring to as the second half of Dark Souls is post-Orenstein and Smo, or the 4 areas that unlock after defeating them. But there are 2 main issues with this. One, these 4 areas don't come close to constituting half of the game, whether it be in quantity, playtime, or number of bosses. And 2, the path and order in which players choose to complete Dark Souls has a lot of variance. You're only required to defeat 4 bosses in order to make it to Anor Londo. And so many areas that are typically associated with the first half are distinct second half experiences for other players. And that also ignores that 2 or even 2.5 of those 4 second half areas aren't even half bad. New Londo Ruins is generally seen as being very good, with some players listing it as their favorite or one of their favorite areas in the whole game. Duke's Archives is generally seen as okay. And again, many people love it, they're just a little underwhelmed by the Crystal Caves portion. But personally, I love that area. It's just a small little showpiece with some neat secrets that kind of pumps you up and hypes you up for the Seath fight. Now, Tomb of the Giants is generally mixed. You either love it or you hate it. I love it, as it shows views of Ash Lake and Demon Ruins. It's challenging, it has loads of secrets and loads of cool NPC interactions, and it also has this respectable tendency to intimidate players, whether it be their first time or their 100th time through. And then you have Izalith, which is typically considered the worst area of the game, and for pretty good reason. Now, I may lose some of you here. I don't think Izalith is all bad. It's true that it has poor enemy variety and painful lighting effects, and it also has an objectively terrible boss, and these things do factor into it being the worst area in the game. But there are some factors that I like about it, but I'll spare you. Also, most of it's optional and skippable. Oh, and there's also the final area of the game, the Kiln of the First Flame, but that's typically not considered really second half, even though it's like the final lead up, you know? It's just kind of a really cool area with some neat secrets. So, taking popular takes into account, of the 4 areas I just mentioned, there are 2 mid, 1 pretty good, and 1 not so good. Is that enough to warrant the word bad being used, though? Is it enough to condemn the second half? And I know at this point a few of you are likely thinking, well, it's not that it's bad, really. It's just that the second half looks bad in comparison to the first half. Hold on to that thought. So now let me point to a few areas that are typically considered second half that are popularly described as good areas. Darkroot Garden, the Painted World of Ariamis, the Undead Asylum, Return Trip, the Great Hollow, Ash Lake, And then the DLC stages, which are largely considered some of the best areas in the game, are distinct second half experiences. Uasil Township, the Royal Wood, the Chasm of the Abyss. Stages like Darkroot Basin, Darkroot Garden, the Depths, the Catacombs, New Londo, Flooded or Not, and the Demon Ruins, they can go into either half. Players tend to complete things in a different order. Those are kind of in the middle. So let's revisit this idea of the first half being so good that it makes the second half look bad. There is some truth to this. The trip from Firelink Shrine to the Undead Parish, then down through Blighttown, up through Sens into Anor Londo, is a masterpiece of flow. And it's something I don't think any Souls game has managed to top since. But it does not represent Dark Souls 1 in its entirety. It's not enough on its own. I don't think the game would be better if it just ended after Anor Londo. I think the game is better for having so much more to do and so many optional challenges to overcome after you defeat Ornstein and Smo. Dark Souls has a lot of elements that don't fully click without exploring and experiencing everything that it has to offer. New Game Plus, making builds for online play. Making builds for PvE experimentation, exploring different playstyles, different weapons, venturing into second half territory with first half gear to try and get some overpowered spells or weapons. Oh, I forgot to use the humanity. Oh, I still got it! Helping people with the hardest bosses and conversely invading people in unexpected places. I love how Dark Souls begins. I also love how it ends. I think that it's silly and inaccurate to call the second half bad. I think it makes more sense to just list the areas that don't jive with you, rather than making a blanket statement that implies that the game is only half good. Even if you absolutely hated, say, Duke's Archives. Going slow on your first playthrough, in terms of total playtime, it's only going to take around 5% of your time. When you actually look at how much time you spend in the least popular areas of the game, it's typically much less than the time it would take an average new player to conquer Anor Londo. It is just not enough to constitute half. For a confident player, it's almost like a victory lap. So overall, I feel the second half bad thing is, it's just a bit overblown, and it's not for me. And I also know that I'm unlikely to convince anyone with this. I just wanted to share my thoughts about why this has kind of just gotten to me over the years. But yeah, thanks for watching, and feel free to get heated in the comments. Peace.